Oh my aging god. I went all the way to Canada to see Shin Ultraman. I'm not the only person who did this apparently because I met other cool people there doing it. But wow. Okay guys, I'm really glad I did it because it was a great trip and it meant a lot to me. Okay, so the best way I can describe Shin Ultraman in a nutshell is it's the closest I've ever felt to getting back to Batman 1989 happening again. Because it's a remake that simultaneously takes the classic material completely seriously, but twists it around, makes it darker, makes it more serious, and makes it perfect. Like, just to put that into context, if you did not see Batman 89 in 1989, up until that point, you knew who Batman was, you knew what he looked like, but you'd only seen the goofy version, you'd only seen the comic version, you'd only seen the cartoon version. Up until that point, you had never seen a serious live-action version of Batman that was as dark as he was meant to be, or taken seriously like he was meant to be. 1989 was the first time you ever saw a Batman movie with a guy you could actually believe was Batman. And this is that for Ultraman. This is the first time I've ever seen Ultraman presented as powerful as people think he is, as serious as people think he is. Even in his own story, people take Ultraman very seriously in this movie. This is the first movie ever made where Ultraman is taken seriously and you believe he exists, and he's held to a much higher standard than he would ever be in reality. Also, what I loved about this movie was Ultraman uses like all his dumbest Showa era attacks, but they're all like taken completely seriously, and they all look incredibly cool. Alright, so Shinji Higuchi has created basically the definitive Ultraman movie, telling the definitive Ultraman story. This movie tackles a bunch of different themes. I'm a little bit torn about this movie because I would say Shin Gojira was a perfect movie. And I want to say this movie is perfect too, but it's also not quite perfect because it has this weird contradictory structure. Like, okay, if you come to this movie just wanting to see Ultraman kick some ass, you're going to get so much Ultraman kicking so much ass. You're going to get all that with bells on. This is a good Ultraman butt-kicking movie. But if you want the greatest movie ever made, not quite. It is an accessible movie. Like, you can get into this movie without knowing who Ultraman is and have a good time with it. With that out of the way, let me go into the plot of the movie. So the movie starts off with a short summary of the events of Ultra Q, which still happened in this movie, in this universe, I guess in like 2016 to 2020. The Ultra Q happening raises so many questions. If Shin Ultra Q happened, was there a Shin Flying Turtle Boy? Did the events of the movie Downsizing happen in this universe? Plenty of others. I'm mostly just wondering if we ever will get a new Ultra Q series based on the events. But by and large, because Ultra Q comes before Ultraman, you had to do Shin Ultra Q to do Shin Ultraman. So in this movie, they just kind of browse over, yeah, it happened, we're not going to talk about it. Which is kind of great. Alright, so anyway, what's going on in this movie is that to do a definitive Ultraman movie, because Ultraman was a TV series, Higuchi has basically created like essentially a hit list of the best episodes of Ultraman, and he's tied them together to make this movie. And it flows well enough, but it's very at odds with the structure of what a TV show is versus the structure of what a movie is. So if you want to break it up, it's honestly like 6 episodes of Ultraman in this movie. We have the first appearance of Ultraman and his fight with Neo Ranga, that's episode 1. Next we have Ultraman versus the Drill Kaiju Gabora as episode 2. After that we have Ultraman versus Zerub, the fake Ultraman, for episode 3. Then we have the giant girls situation. That's actually an Ultra Q episode. So again, they're dying to make Ultra Q out of this. Then after that, we have the Mephiliz episode. And finally, the Zeton/Zophie episode. So yeah, that's 6 very strong, very interesting episodes. Now, they do thematically tie together into a single, enjoyable, perfect movie experience. But as much as I love it, the movie structure also kind of sabotages it because it'll jump from one storyline to another without really like giving you closure because they're just kind of like doing a hit list of all these episodes. Like, okay, the first 2 episodes are fucking gorgeous. I saw this in a huge theater. The fucking acoustics were amazing. Like, the kaiju sounded real and they looked as big as they were because they were on a big screen. It was so fucking enjoyable. And like, literally, if you're just here to see Ultraman beat the shit out of some monsters, you're gonna get your money's worth in the first 2 episodes. Like, the first 2 episodes are so effing good. It's a simultaneous fusion of everything that worked in classic Ultraman, presented in this modern, new CGI context. The kaiju are glorious and strange. Ultraman himself moves with this absolute fury like an alien in a way that you've never seen him move before. He does a move like Goku from DBZ, but it's amazing and it's different because he's like a 600 foot tall, like 1,000 pounds heavy version of Goku. And he has all his classic moves and he uses them amazingly. But then he has all these like weird gravity defying moves that really like tread the line between him being an alien, between him being a man. He moves like an alien, but he also moves like a man. And there's all these like super deep cut fan references to the bad special effects of 60s Ultraman. Like, it's weird because this Ultraman is like CGI, but there are parts where he's lit and where he's positioned where he looks like a bad plastic model like the 60s Ultraman. And it's like, they didn't have to do that. Like, they literally had to make it look worse for it to look like that. Alright, so now I have to talk about the biggest change that takes place in this movie. The biggest change from classic Ultraman to Shin Ultraman is in the old Ultraman 60 series. Shin Hayata died and fused with the Ultraman symbiote. And then after that, they had kind of a Captain Marvel switcheroo thing where the two of them were aware of each other, but they couldn't talk to each other. And the man standing there was either Hayata or Ultraman, and never both. Barely both? The point is, the two of them swapped places. Hayata was like, I can't do this, it's a job for Ultraman. And then Ultraman would fly off and turn back into Hayata. In Shin Ultraman, at the start of the movie, Shinji Kaminaga is killed. And he's apparently actually killed by Ultraman from the shockwave of him landing on the planet. And Ultraman takes on his form after he comes to Earth because he feels bad or because he feels guilty. But he's not fusing with him. Shinji Kaminaga is shown to be dead. Ultraman in this movie has replaced Kaminaga, and when Ultraman replaced Kaminaga starts acting very bizarrely. Early on in the film, I wondered if at first Ultraman was like piling his dead body around like a meat puppet. But they actually clarify in the movie because Ultraman goes back to Shinji's dead body and looks at him rotting in a forest, making it very clear that this is a completely different interpretation of what Ultraman even is. It's also interesting because this is probably the most Ultraman I've ever experienced in any Ultraman media, aside from like the dumb scenes in Ultraman Taro where Ultraman just shows up and like tells Taro what to do. Alright, so I've only gone over the first 2 episodes. The 3rd episode, this guy named Zerub comes down, and Zerub is our first majorly weird, super intelligent, speaks Japanese antagonist alien who's attempting to conquer Japan through political means. And because he's this classic 60s Ultraman villain, he's like hanging out here wearing a fedora and a scarf. And he's this archetypal Ultraman villain I've seen in a couple different Ultraman series. I want to call the classy gentleman alien. Anyway, so eventually Ultraman and the SSP get together and they escape, and Ultraman foils his plans. And Ultraman versus Zerub is the best, most exciting battle in the movie. Ultraman kicks Zerub's fucking ass, and he kicks it literally all over Tokyo, and it's fucking gorgeous. It's a classic Ultraman fight, but it's got that like DBZ aerial battle logic, and it's mixed with the real density of modern Tokyo, where like everything is just so fucking tight together. Like you see Ultraman and like Zerub have to like weave through like the fucking narrow alleys of Japan because Japan is just so narrow. So fucking good. After that, the next episode is the giant woman story from Ultra Q. This ends up being very amusing because they play it for hilarity, and it's like, hey, look at that giant woman. You can see her giant panties. And that's about as far as that goes. After that, this segues into the Mephiles storyline. The Mephiles storyline is probably the most significant part of the movie, but also the most broken part of the movie. So Mephiles comes after Zerub, and he's basically a better version of Zerub. And like Zerub, he makes a deal with the Japanese government. Unlike Zerub, he's handsome, he's slick, he's very cool. He also offers the Japanese government and therefore humanity this thing called a beta box, which is essentially a giant version of Ultraman's transformation stick. It's how it's a big plot MacGuffin box. But anyway, the twist is that in exchange for getting this beta box, Japan has to accept Mephiles as the one true god. And kind of weird. Now, there's a nice underlying subplot in this movie about how Ultraman's presence and the reality that humanity is just one species among the millions of alien species in the universe. Like, how does that affect religion? And whether or not, if Ultraman was real, would he be God? So, I love the Mephiles storyline. I thought it was kind of like the best part of the movie, but it has the worst ending of any of the episodes in the movie. Because what really pisses me off about the Mephiles storyline is just when it's starting to climax, Mephiles sees Zophi, and Mephiles decides to just peace the fuck out because he does not want to deal with Zophi. So then we just go straight into the next episode, and the Mephiles storyline is just dropped there cold. This really bothers me because A, Mephiles escapes, he never suffers any consequence for trying to take over the world, and there's no real closure to like the various problems he's brought up with like the Japanese government being like corrupt, or you know, his like weird plan to like evolve humanity. Anyway, it's all dropped, and then in the last episode we deal with Zophi and Zeton as the villains for the final act. Now, both of these characters are super dramatic reimaginings, probably the most dramatic reimagining in the movie. Up to now, most of the other kaiju and aliens have been like one for one with like their classic versions. Here, Zophi is kind of pitched as the last villain of the movie, but he's not actually. He's just classic Zophi, and he's chaotic neutral, but he's more serious, and he's a little creepy, and he wants to kill the entire human race and Ultraman on a technicality because they broke the rules of the Planet of Light. Now, Zeton, on the other hand, is probably the most dramatic reimagining in the entire movie. They've completely changed him from being a super strong bug kaiju to this hyper-geometric railgun with feelers on top. Anyway, at the end of the film, the SSP figures out all this ridiculous math using a PSVR to stop Zeton, and Ultraman executes the math, resulting in Zeton exploding, which results in Zeton exploding, and then Zophi is like really impressed by this, but also disappointed in Ultraman, so he wants to hold Ultraman accountable for his action, and Ultraman's like, fine then, take me to space jail if you're so mad at me. So I guess Zophi takes him back to the Planet of Light to stand trial, I guess. But as his final act, as he leaves the Earth, he brings Shinji Kaminaga back to life, which is a major punch in the dick, perfect twist ending. Good way to end the movie. Now, I like this ending because it's a classic Ultraman movie, and you have no idea what the implications of the ending are because it cuts off the second Shinji Kaminaga wakes back up. Now, we have no clue who this man waking up is. Is it the Shinji Kaminaga we saw for 2 seconds at the start of the film, who also did not experience the whole film because he's been a rotting corpse in a forest for several weeks? Adding an additional level of intrigue is the fact that Asami, the heroine of the movie, fell in love with Ultraman, so she's really excited to see Shinji Kaminaga, but she doesn't know if this is going to be... Well, I don't know, so she doesn't know, nobody knows. Anyway, she had her whole romance with Ultraman, but she never met the real Shinji. So is she going to fall in love with the real Shinji because she loved Ultraman? Maybe, maybe not. Is Shinji Kaminaga going to be as cool as Ultraman, an alien who didn't know how to brew coffee? Who knows? Time will tell. The additional possible what-ifs of, what if this is actually, the same personality who was Ultraman reincarnated as a human? That could be a thing. Or maybe not. It's really hard to tell because, again, they keep pointing out that the original Shinji is rotting away in a forest. If this is Ultraman's reincarnation, I guess it's more likely that he'll get back together with Asami, They could also do like some crazy mix of the two where the original Kaminaga comes back to life, but he also could remember being Ultraman because Ultraman took his form. I'm sure that one of these days they'll answer this question, but for right now it's got no answer, so you just gotta think about it. Alright, so I'm giving Shin Ultraman a 9 out of 10. It's an almost perfect movie. The directing, perfect. The battles, perfect. The music, so perfect. It's just the 60s Ultraman music and some music from Shin Gojira and Evangelion again, but it's all fucking perfect because they remixed it. The story of the movie is perfect. The ending of the movie is perfect. The only issue I have with this movie is that I'm a little kind of unsure if I was happy or not with the fact that the villains were like thematically connected, but not really. Like, there's a lot of villains in this movie, and I borderline want to say it has too many villains. But I mean, at the same time, you get Ultraman just beating the shit out of like 6 different kaiju, so that's cool. I'm the most feeling unsatisfied with Mephiles because I feel like they just straight up dropped that story just when it was getting good. Also, I'm super disappointed Baltan is not in this movie. I think he's like Ultraman's most iconic villain, and I'm like really shocked they didn't include him. So the next Shin movie is going to be Shin Kamen Rider by Hideki Anno. Anno has stated though that if Shin Ultraman does really well, he also wants to make Shin Ultra 7 and then one more undecided Ultraman movie to make it a trilogy. I would guess it would be Ultraman Jack, but I have no idea. At the Fantasia Film Festival where I saw this movie, Shinji Higuchi was asked about how he felt about making Shin Ultra 7, and he said this.
After watching this movie, if someone's willing to put in the money.
So yeah, in short, Higuchi will do it if he gets the money. So that is my review of Shin Ultraman, but I'm actually not done talking about Shin Ultraman. If you like this review, I'm currently working on a second, darker follow-up video to this one that I kind of pulled out of this one, where I talk about the underlying philosophy and the darker religious symbolism in the movie that I think the movie was trying to get at as its kind of like underlying theme. I'm not including that in this review because it's a lot to unpack and it's a lot of theoretical, philosophical, plant brain stuff. Anyway, I need a few more days to figure it out because randos get pissed off when I talk about Jesus. And was Ultraman Jesus in this movie? That's something else you have to consider. Alright, anyway, I'm you, Buster Green. Please subscribe. Thank you. Good night.